little bit about me in the center. Well, the center used to be called the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. We're the same place, same mission, different name. We celebrated 50 years a couple of years ago, and then we changed the name. The name was starting to become confusing to people about what we were about. And so we changed the name, but our mission hasn't changed. We're a fully accredited counseling center uh, that is intentional and skilled in integrating people's faith and spiritual lives into their healing process, as well as helping people who maybe have been burned by communities of faith that are unhealthy, sometimes trying to sort that out. What is my tradition and what is some things I didn't experience that were good from my particular community. So I think that's part of what makes us neat and great. We're also nonprofit, so we help people who don't have insurance or have limited insurance, and we have generous givers. Um, and Something else I was going to say about that. It'll come to me. Uh, and then my role is, I'm we have a division of the program or a group of programs that are about education, are about leadership development, spiritual development. It's kind of a hodgepodge of stuff. And I guess the way I would explain it is I'm about programs and relationships and coaching and interventions that help uh, churches and organizations uh, discover and nurture what really makes life and work good. And I'll talk a little bit about that today in our bit about spiritual direction. A bit more about my story. I was a United Methodist minister, and I was ordained in fully in '94. I served as a student pastor before that. I did that for a while. I came to Iowa to be a college chaplain. I'm from Mississippi. You may hear some accent here and there. I was a chaplain at Simpson College from 2001 to 2009. And then I've served in local churches, small and large churches. And I made a transition a few years ago, largely based on my sense of call and my relationship with my family, um, to leave pastoral ministry. And I actually have a home business where I sell old toys, vintage toys online. Thought that was going to be my job. But through some amazing kind of God kind of experiences, I got the opportunity to come here and be a part of the Mind and Spirits Counseling Center, and been here for about I think I'm going on my fourth year now. Pandemic makes that all seem weird because I started during pandemic. I feel like I've started three times. So my undergraduate is in counseling, and then I have a master's of divinity. Um, and My heart has always been with the intersection of faith and reason and faith and mental health. So this fits really good. So I'd like to hear a little bit about you as well. And so here's my question for this morning or this afternoon. So your name, which is on the screen, but also your context. And then the last question is, who is someone who has loved you before you really knew them and changed your life? That's the big question. Somebody that loved you and knew you before you really knew them, who made a very positive influence on your life. Now, often that's a parent or grandparent or uncle, family member, but it doesn't have to be. But what I would like you want you to reach deep for is try to find somebody who kind of really knew and loved you before you really knew them, and we're going to go somewhere with that. So um, I'll go first with that. So I think about my grandmother, and I thought her name was Blam Blam. Uh, That's what I called her, because she had cheeks that I thought if she ran, they would go blam, 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 blam. I'm not sure she liked that or not, but she let me call her Blam Blam for a long time before I realized that her name was Julia. And then I learned that she volunteered at a children's home, and I learned how good she made pound cakes. And when I got to be a teenager, when I wanted to just go, she'd pull me aside and say, "Here, sit with me a while on the swing," and talk for what seemed to me 2 hours, but was probably 45 minutes. But I knew those were special moments, even though part of me just wanted to get on my scooter and get going. Because my dad set it up so that I had to go there to put gas in my scooter. I realize now what he was doing. So I'd visit my grandparents, pretty regularly because of that. Uh, Now I'm glad I sat there and visited with her. And I have to say, I never learned everything about her. Uh, there's still mysteries to my grandmother. And yet we still had a relationship. And we had a relationship before I knew her. And I'm going to come back to that in a bit too and talk about why that matters to the subject today. That's my story. What's yours? So I'm going to show you a picture. We'll go to the next slide, please. That's my grandmother. And I love this picture because I mean, she kind of looks like a flapper. I'm sure, I don't think she was, but it's just a beautiful picture of her. And it's a reminder that there's a lot of my grandmother I don't know. Uh, and yet I did know her. And yet I had a relationship with her before I even knew her name, right? Um, Now, I come from a neck of the woods and down in South Mississippi. There's a large Southern Baptist influence down there, and often we talk about having a personal relationship with God or personal relationship with Jesus. And I'm from a United Methodist tradition, and we talk a lot about process. So I've always kind of been thinking about those different ways of thinking about it. And one day it just kind of hit me like, when did I not have a personal relationship with my grandmother? Right? Did I have to get her name right? Did I have to understand everything about her before she started loving and caring for me? It seems to me that the most important thing was not understanding it all, uh, but growing in that relationship. And my bias is that that's true of all of us of our relationship with God. Could we go to the next slide, please? So my bias is that we're all spiritual, uh, and 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 what I mean by that is we all live in relationship, uh, relationships of ultimate meaning that are not fully testable and provable, uh, and that these are what really give life depth, beauty, and meaning, as well as its tensions and its struggles. Uh, Most of what makes life good is not testable and measurable. In fact, if we start testing and measure it, often we destroy it. For instance, and I think John Polkinghorne used this example, and I'm going to refer to him later. He was an Anglican priest who was also first a physicist. He says, if I start setting little tests to whether you really love me or not, I destroy the relationship. Everything's not testable. Everything's not provable. And I would say most of what makes life good is not that way.
Did you get some chili or anything?
Yeah, I want one.
So we all experience our being and the
Okay.
being all that is as more of the sum of its parts. That's another thing that I mean when I say we are all spiritual. There is this mystery about being and living and connecting, where one of the reasons we can't measure it is everything is more than the sum of its parts. We can break things down, we can analyze them, but they don't tell us the whole story. It can be helpful, it can be interesting, it can lead us to new discoveries, but it doesn't tell us the whole story. We need a different lens. We're all in a relationship with God before we know anything about God, even if we don't use that word. That's a bias I have. I could be wrong, might be an all big accident, but I don't think it is. And my bias is that we're hardwired to respond to God's love and presence. No matter how much we know and love God and receive God's love, we can never fully know God. But yet we still can have a real relationship with God. And that's first happens on God's side, not my side. That's my bias. I may be wrong. You don't have to agree with me. But I think it's good to know where I'm coming from. So, when you thought about the person, that loved you before you loved them, uh, you know, we all have had this experience at some level, at some place of being in a relationship that has grown. Uh, we have shared stories, even just in this small amount of time, that really are mystical, life changing, not fully measurable and definable, but powerful, influencing us in positive ways. We can know and we can say something about it. We can say what it is, we can say what it's not, but it's always more. This is true of our relationship with God as well. I'm influenced and changed in ways that are not fully knowable. Uh, I chuckled one time. I found myself saying, I'm praying, but nothing's happening. Uh, and then this little voice came to me saying, well, how would you know? Is it possible that the divine is shaping me in ways that I'm not always conscious about? I believe that's true. Maybe I'm never conscious. Maybe I'm only conscious after I look back over time and go, wait a minute, I'm different. Something's moved, something's changed, something's grown, something's less heavy. And this is true of our relationship with others, and it's true of our relationship with God. Um, I don't believe anything is secular. I don't believe anything is purely physical or purely spiritual. That's part of the mystery of it all. It's all mixed up. God is in every molecule of the universe. And I don't know if this is true or not, but something keeps coming to me in this 100% of God in every molecule of the universe, 100% of the places in the world. And the reason I say that is my understanding of God is not the biggest thing in the world of things, which is often how I think we think about God, and especially people who critique God believing people or faith people of faith. Uh, you believe in a big man in the sky. No, I believe in a ground and source of all being. That
I
is,
like that framing of it.
mhm.
And I often deal with people who are secular. What I think the difference is between you and them is that you have sacred imagination, to use St. Augustine's conception, working through you so you can imagine in broader detail the image of God in all things. And I really want to validate and honor you for that.
Well, thank you. And I want to validate and honor that I think we all have brains that kind of work in different ways. Some of us lean more toward big picture, imaginative views, and some of us lean more toward the 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 particulars of things. And I think we all have a place in this world. Um, I think the challenge is respecting each other's different knowledge and growing and learning from each other. So I know in no way mean to be pointing out and saying, this is the only way to be in the world. Um, I just happen to be me. This is who I bring to this. Um, if we go to the next slide, there's a great quote from, and I mentioned John Polkinghorne. I really love this quote from him. He says, we have to treat things in their wholeness, in their totality. Consider a beautiful painting. A chemist could take the beautiful painting, could analyze every scrap of paint on the canvas, tell you what its chemical composition was, would incidentally destroy the painting by doing that, but would have missed the point of the painting because there's something you can only encounter in its totality. So we need complementary ways of looking at the world. And here he's talking about this scientific view where we kind of break things down and take things apart. But we also need the spiritual view of the world. We do need the bits and pieces for sure, he says. That's a worthwhile thing to do. But we also need, but it's not the whole story. I like that. And if you've never read him, and you're interested at faith and reason and science and faith and how they might uh, inform each other and not just live in separate boxes, he's got some great thoughts along that. He's a great theologian as well as a great scientist. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to put forth a few ideas that I think capture what spiritual direction is about. And when I say spiritual direction, we're kind of also overlapping the idea of spiritual growth or spirituality. So what I'm saying is spiritual direction generally is also true of just the spiritual journey as well. So the spiritual direction is about, and this is by Walter Berghart, excuse me. It's a long, loving look at the real. Long, loving look at the real. It's taking time, long. It's looking with love, with compassion, with care. And it's really trying to be honest about what is and what isn't there. Even the parts of life and the parts of of ourselves that we might not like to look at. How do we look at that in a loving way? How do we try to see those things through the lens of God, who is love? How do we hold something gently, compassionately, that maybe we don't even want to really connect with? And at the same time, how do we honor and nurture those things that really move us? So being able to take that same loving gaze and connection to all things. Could we go to the next slide, please? So I'm talking a bit about what spiritual direction is and what spiritual directors do. When I did my training for spiritual direction through the Sienna Center in Racine, Wisconsin, and after about a year into the program, we had these small groups, practicum groups, where we really do spiritual direction with each other. We're not practicing anything, we're really doing it, bringing our real lives to it. And so halfway through a program, often you get the leaders want to know, how's it going for you and everything, have any questions, everything. And so you may not know this about me, but I'm a little bit of a smart ass, and people shared and I thought, I'm going to get this guy. And I said, this has been really good. But when are we going to learn to channel the dead? And he just went white. I said, I'm just joking with you. I'm just joking with you. Now, there may or may not be something there to that. Um, I do have my own biases about that, I'll have to admit, but that's not what spiritual direction is. That's not what we're doing. Again, I come back to that theme of relationship. It's about paying attention and having that loving gaze at all the relationships that give life its meaning. And that could be human relationship, that can be relationships with the creation, it can be relationships with our deep and true selves, and realizing where we're honestly ourselves and where we might not be honest about who we are. Uh, it could be about our relationship with our sense of vocation, and certainly about our relationship with God. It's not fortune telling. In fact, one of the things that I believe is true in my own spiritual journey is if ever I get a sense of God leading me some way, and then what follows is, if you will do this, this will happen. I have found usually that has more to do with ego than God. Um, that's either me trying to project something forward to comfort myself or to make myself important, or to protect myself from some kind of fear of failure. But I do believe um, that God always calls us to act from the core of love that is God and is deep in us. And so, whereas I may not always be, I may not be happy or able to predict the results of it, I do find I'm better and happier and more grounded when I am coming at all things and making all decisions, and I never do it perfectly from that place of deep love and meaning. And so I think spiritual direction helps me do that. And again, it's not, if you do this, this will happen. Everything will be good. Everything will be easy. Sometimes it's even more challenging. But it helps me live at a place of depth. Um, it's not therapy, and it's really not pastoral care. Though there sometimes is some overlap there, and it does get murky at times. Uh, but it's not therapy because we're not really treating disorder. Um, in fact, one of the things, so the calls, people who are calling the center and saying, I'm looking for a spiritual director, if they don't have somebody they know they want to work with, because you can call people directly that do spiritual direction at the center, they come to me first. And part of that discernment process is for me to listen and hear, is it spiritual direction they're seeking, or is it spiritually integrated psychotherapy? Therapy is about healing, changing, um, uh, disorder. Uh, but spiritual direction is more about going deeper, understanding, uh, seeking meaning, living with things we can't change, letting go, embracing challenges or calls. This is the realm of spiritual direction, not therapy. Uh, and I struggle with what to call it too, because it's really not a lot of direction at all. It's more about helping people hear themselves. Uh, and sometimes it's about saying, "Hey, I noticed this," or "It sounds like this is what's behind this. What do you think?" Um, and sometimes if the answer is no, we both learn something. So it's not about me always being right about it. And I find that there's something changes in me when someone listens to me well, and when I'm able to speak things that have been bouncing around in my head for way too long. There's something about sharing things with another person that changes the way I hear them, receive them, view them, as opposed to having them just bouncing around, thoughts and feelings bounce around in my head. This is, this is what spiritual direction is about. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide, please. I like this definition. Marion Cowan says it like this: spiritual direction is a time-honored term for a conversation ordinarily between two persons, though we do group spiritual direction too sometimes, in which one person consults another, more spiritually experienced person about the ways in which God, or however one names the divine, holy, or universal, may be touching her or his life directly or indirectly. I like that one too. And I a little caveat there about the usually spiritually more mature person. I think, you know, I grow in spiritual direction. Uh, I think maybe the real uh, the most important thing to me is that they have some training and direction about how to do it and have some life experience. Uh, there, I can imagine someone coming to me and me in some realms being very helpful to them, and in some realms realizing that, well, I'm still wrestling with that myself, and I might refer them to someone else and say, that's not. And I can imagine going to a director and having the same response. So I think it's also important for spiritual directors, no matter how long we've been doing this, to realize there are just some places that we can go with folks, and there's some places where we need to be humble and say, I think somebody else might be able to help you with this, and maybe help them find that person. And that's one of the things I like about working at the center, is that we have a good network of folks where we can do that. Can we go to the next slide, please? What I'm doing here is just giving you some quotes that I think sum up the spirit of spiritual direction. And the reason I'm doing this is because of its very nature. It's hard to say this is it, So I'm painting a a big picture here with poetic and poetry and imagery. And I often actually use this poem when I do conflict mediation with people and groups. Uh, and I like it. Uh, this is by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds in this space. We seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work in it side by side. Again, I think that works for spiritual direction as well as the conflict transformation work that I do. I use this poem a lot, and feel free to use it. And Amy, you can give folks these slides too, by the way. And then another quote that I think captures it. This is Parker Palmer, who comes from the Quaker tradition. He says, the human soul doesn't want to be fixed. It simply wants to be heard. The soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, and shy. When we go crashing through the woods, shouting for it to come out so we can help it, the soul will stay in hiding. But if we are willing to sit quietly and wait for a while, the soul may show itself. We have a director at the center who's also a therapist, Christine Dietz, and I'm quoting her a lot, and I like. She comes from the Jewish tradition, so she comes at things in a little different ways sometimes, and I learn a lot from her. But she has this quote that I think really sums up this idea of, the soul being like um, this wild animal that, you go chasing after it. You're not gonna see it. She says, nothing needs to happen. She just stops there. Nothing needs to happen, but I'm going to flesh it out a bit more. Nothing needs to happen except that we are present for each other and open to the Spirit of God. Um, and that again is why this is very different from therapy. Uh, we don't have a diagnosis. We don't have a treatment plan. It is the directee is very much in charge of the time. If my directee just wants to be quiet with someone for an hour, then they can do that. Sometimes when I have gone deep in a session, the next session, I don't want to go shallow, and that's okay. The directee always sets the agenda for what we're talking about. I never come back and say, now let's go back to what you were talking about. And I say this often, unless you tell me you're having chest pains or you're thinking about hurting yourself, we're not going to talk about anything that you brought up before unless you want to talk about it. But I am going to care for you, right? So I'm not going to allow, if you're at risk, then yeah, I'm going to bring it up. But barring that, um, I find people need that kind of space. Sometimes I need to go deep, and sometimes I don't, and sometimes I need to just be. And I find it's great to have a place. I go once a month to just show up. And there is a discipline of showing up. There are times I've showed up and I don't know that I need to be here today or want to be here today. And sometimes I'm quiet for about 20 minutes. And it's amazing what comes up. Uh, some of the most moving conversations I've had with my director have been days when I thought, oh, I don't need to do this. I don't want to do this. There's something about doing it and doing it regularly that makes a difference. Next slide, please. I think maybe I forgot to say next slide on one. I forget when I'm changing, you're not seeing it. Let's go to the one that has my grinning face on it there. You see that one? I can't see the slide, so you just need to tell me if I'm on the wrong slide. So spiritual direction, we've talked a bit about it in general. But whenever you're meeting with, or if you were becoming a spiritual director, it's always in particular people, particular approaches, particular personalities. And that's part of what I do at the center when people call me, is trying to figure out, what are people seeking? What is it they're looking for? I'm not much of a spiritual practices person. Like, I don't know all kinds of techniques and everything, and don't, I do some of that. Most of mine is imaginative work. But Andrea, my colleague, is really good at that stuff. So if that's what folks are wanting, I try to send them to her. But this is me. This is kind of how I come at it. I invite people into a compassionate space in which to explore and deepen the sacred relationships that give life depth, beauty, and meaning. You've heard me say that a lot, haven't you? So that they might live more authentic, connected lives of depth, beauty, and meaning. And I do this through deep listening, intentional silence, and imaginative reflection. So, just as people are not spiritual in general, we're spiritual in particular. Uh, and at best, when our traditions do it well, they help us grow in that particular way of being connected and living a spiritual life, a connected life, as opposed to being hoops that we jump through, or things that we feel like we're getting merit badges for if we do this or that, are at worst even compulsively become compulsive for us when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, the ritual, the song, the groups, the worship. They're meant to be nurturing connection. And all religious traditions have always had people that have played this role formally or informally. Uh, and why? Again, because we're just wired that way. We are wired for connection and meaning. And I believe we are drawn by this divine love of the ground and source of all our being, I call God. Uh, And I'm not talking about a, nameless mystical force. I'm talking about something that's personal and real and relational, but not a big thing, not the biggest thing in the world of things, but something is altogether transcends all that. And I believe we're all connected to that, whatever word we use for it or not. Let's go to the next slide. I like this quote by Buckminster Fuller. So you'd see a slide with a drop of water. Love is metaphysical gravity. You think about gravity, right? I believe in gravity. Maybe you don't. But here's what I know about gravity. It doesn't care whether you believe about it or not to act on you. Uh, I again bias. These are not testable, provable things, but I'm going to tell you why I believe it. That the ground and source of all being at its essence is love. Only I don't mean an emotion. I mean something much bigger than that I don't even fully understand. But the reason I say that is if we look at the religions of the world that have been around a while, or if we just look at people who have that resonate and we say that's a person who lives in depth and meaning, and we get their stories and we get a sense of their experiences, often we hear the same kind of language of deep connected love. If you look at the songs and the poetry of the mystics of different traditions, we keep coming back to that. Now, so for me, where I size this up is either that's just some big accident of this big accident we're in called creation, which I have to acknowledge could be the fact. It could be there is no meaning in anything. Could be. But I'm not convinced by that. And since this theme, no matter how we slice up the way to worship or the way to be or the challenges that religions are meant to meet in the world or philosophies, no matter what that is, when we hear the words of people who have devoted their lives to deep prayer, we keep coming up with this language of deep love and connection, of oneness, of being held by something bigger than us that adores us, sustains us, and connects all things. And it just keeps coming up. And so I believe that's essentially what is behind all that is. Now, in the Christian tradition, which I am a part of, and I think is the best way I know of looking at it. That's why I'm Christian. Jesus embodies that. I mean, that's what we mean when we say, the divine is incarnate in this person, this human Christ, of Jesus Christ. And that's back to that idea of, one of the great things about the Christian tradition is this idea of spirit and flesh are not these opposite things, that it's both and. I'm going to skip this. I got some good stuff here, but you'll have these slides because I want to get to a little bit about how to get to spiritual lecture. And I kind of butchered this slide because I just realized that I tried to merge a bunch of slides and I kind of butchered it. So I'll walk you through it a little bit. If you want to find a spiritual director, there's a couple of ways you might do that. One, the simplest way is call me. And that doesn't mean you have to work with me. There's other folks at the center who do this. Somebody asked the faith tradition of our center. We started in United Methodist Church, but we're not anymore. That was within a few years, maybe even less than a year, we became an independent center. We have folks who are Catholic who are therapists and spiritual directors. We have folks that are Protestant. I think both of them are actually United Methodist background. We have one spiritual director or counselor who is Jewish. And then we have therapists from Christian traditions. We have therapists who don't really have a particular tradition, but they are all deep meaning kind of folks. and they're able to integrate both um, spiritual questions, spirituality, and religion into people's therapy. Uh, then also skip down to the last bullet point there. Spiritual Directors International is a kind of an organization that brings different spiritual directors together. And if you go there, you'll see just how many different perspectives there are on this. They have a web page, and you can find folks in your area there. That's another way to locate a spiritual director. And of course, there's word of mouth. You may know somebody who meets with someone and they can recommend someone. So, uh, but feel free to call me or to email me if you're interested in finding someone, because even if there's not someone at the center, we have a network. I meet once a month with spiritual directors all over Iowa. And so we can help you find somebody. Sometimes folks will even meet virtually. You can do that. Some people prefer to meet in person. I prefer in person, but everybody's different. If you would like to become a spiritual director, or if you just want to participate in an intentional spiritual development community, we have a program called Prairie Fire, and we will be starting a new cohort this fall. And if you reach out to me, I'll give you more information about that. We've got some open houses coming up where you can check that out if you might be interested in that. That's a 2-year program. And then after you do a 2-year program, you can do a 3rd-year practicum, which is the training in spiritual direction. So, and you don't have to do it consecutively. You can do 2 years and wait a while and do the practicum. But that is our spiritual direction training program. Prairie Fire is separate. You don't have to do both. You can just do Prairie Fire if you don't want to be a spiritual director. And then we also do individual as well as group spiritual direction. And I even do a program for churches, which is really group spiritual direction, called Finding Your Why, where we listen to our stories to try to figure out who it is throughout time that we are and what happens when we show up. And it helps us know what to say yes to and what to say no to as a church. I'm going to wrap it up there. No, we're deadline, and so you may have places you need to go, but it doesn't have to be a hard stop for me. And I think I've got control, right? I can decide when we stop, right? So I'm gonna hang around. If anybody's got questions or want to talk more, I don't have anywhere I got to get to, so I've got space and time. And thanks for joining us and being part of this conversation. So if there's anything you want to talk about or ask, and I didn't follow chat very well, so if there's something there that I'm missing.
There was a question early on about if there was a spiritual tradition tied to the center, but you answered
Right.
it.
Yeah, I saw that one. I think I answered that one. Is we're not one particular tradition. Oh, and I know the other thing I was going to say about our center that I like is I knew when I was a pastor that if I had a young person or even an older person who was their faith was important to them and they were wrestling with matters of sexuality and sexual orientation, I knew that this is a place that they could go and both would be treated with rigor, uh, 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 knowledge, and respect. And that was wonderful to know that I had a place like that. I knew that this is a place that they would be safe.
Might need that more than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the only question. Amanda had a comment about the dangers of academia, sometimes forgetting to look at the whole. I think that
Yeah.
was fairly
Yeah.
early. So
I didn't include him in here, but there's a book called The Master and His Emissary by McGilchrist, who's a neuroscientist, and his argument is that we have really two brains. One looks at the nuts and bolts kind of things, and one looks at big picture, and they're actually both functioning in the same way and see the world very differently. And we need them both. But his argument is that we are better off when we lead with the big picture part of our brain. Uh, and that we are more and more becoming a culture, at least in Western culture, that is forgetting that. Neat book. I haven't finished it, but it's really powerful book.
What is the name of that again, Chris?
The Master and His Emissary. I don't know how you spell emissary. It's emissary. It refers to a sort of a parable. McGill Christ is his name. I can't remember.
Okay. Got it.
It is not a easy read, but it's a good read.
A lot of them aren't easy reads.
Well, what's neat about his though is he's really intending to be scientifically rigorous, and I find that helpful.
Well, unfortunately, I have to go. I'm sorry I was late. I had a
Hey, Chris.
physical therapy appointment. Wonderful to see you, Chris, and everyone here. So God love you. God bless you. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks. I appreciate the privilege.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also need to go. I want to thank you, Chris, for this. And I want to extend to Brenda, as you move through your journey to the diaconate, feel free to reach out at any time. And I expect this is a very difficult time for you, but I also believe that God will be with you as you move through these times.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Blessings to everyone, and thank you for this.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lori.
Lori.
Bye-bye.
All right. Yes, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to, I'm going to ask Amy to send me the slides because I got interrupted with a couple phone calls
Okay.
because I'm the only person in the office, but thank you very much. I appreciate it very much.
Well, I hope you and others know, please feel free to call, email, reach out. You'll never get charged just for saying, hey, I need a listening ear. Or just, give me some information. We don't, I'd like to think that there's a place that all clergy and church leaders can go that's outside of their network to bring things that are weighty, because it sometimes can be, I know as a pastor, it can be hard to find that sometimes. So,
I can, yeah. So, thank you.
sure.
Have a great rest of your day,
Good to meet
everybody.
you, Brenda. Blessings
Bye.
to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Amy, thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. I'm hoping that if we get these like more regularly scheduled, that people will jump on board more often. And
Yeah, I would be happy to do some more on other topics if you want
Okay.
to brainstorm. And also, I may send you an email with some information on the prayer fire and spiritual direction as well. If you would send it,
perfect.
if you'd be willing to send it out to your congregations and clergy.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things I will say about Prairie Fire this year is that we have a lot of support for scholarships. So if there are people that are getting sticker shock, but they really want to do it, they should not be discouraged by the price if they're willing to put in the time and the effort.
Okay.
I think if there's any year that we can make it affordable for folks, it's this year.
Okay.
We've had
That's
some
great.
very generous donors.
Yeah, we can
All
certainly do that. So, well, thank you so much.
Good to see you. I'm going to
Yeah.
walk around, try to see if I bump into you in the neighborhood.
Okay, sounds good. Have a good rest of the day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.